Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates in your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the show. In this week's episode, I sit down and speak with my friend Amy Goldsmith, who's a partner in the New York law firm Tarter, Krinsky Drogin. Amy's practice focuses on IP, cyber, and privacy. For those of you who listen to this podcast, you know that cybersecurity and privacy is a big topic for me, and I think this conversation is timely, informative, and useful. We talk about ransomware threats, PII, security, safety, and basically all things cyber. We also talk about the need for businesses of all sizes to document their information security practices. So when the proverbial poop hits the fan, you've got an action plan to fall back on. A WISP, or a written information security plan, is often overlooked by privately held businesses, large and small, and we dig into what a WISP is and why it's critical. If you'd like to reach out to Amy, her email is agoldsmith@tarterkrinsky.com, or you can find her on LinkedIn, Amy Goldsmith Esquire. Now, if you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this podcast, why not drop me an email at gbcoyle@thecoilegroup.com and let's chat. Now, on to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm Gordon Coyle, and today I've got Amy Goldsmith, who's the partner in charge of cybersecurity at Tarter, Krinsky Drogin, here to talk about all things cyber. So I'm going to ask Amy if she would just take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we'll kind of jump into some of the topics around cybersecurity that I think a lot of people are interested in finding out about today. So go ahead and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gordon, for allowing me to participate in the podcast. I was really excited to receive the invitation. So I'm Amy Goldsmith. I'm a partner in the intellectual property group at Tarter, Krinsky Drogin. And as Gordon said, I'm the one in charge of cybersecurity. So I'm the one that gets all of the emails and phone calls from my partners when our clients have an issue. And which is great because it's a really fun practice area for me anyway, as an attorney, not so much necessarily for our clients who, this is such a relatively new area of the law, and for clients, this isn't managed service providers anymore. This is a lot more complex given ransomware and all of the issues that, that we have. So Tarter, Krinsky Drogin we're a mid-sized law firm located in New York and in LA. And we have all of the different practice areas that any attorney and any client might want. So before COVID, I would be able to run down the hall and ask my corporate attorney for some help or speak with our international group. Now it's a little bit different, but we're still really interactive with one another. So what do we do in privacy and cybersecurity? Well, our clients ask us for help in two ways. One is, well, what sort of internal documents do we need? And under what laws are we mandated to follow? And it all depends on what sort of information collection the clients are doing. So from where are they collecting this information? What kind of information are they collecting? And where is it going?
Let me ask you a question before you go a little bit deeper into that. Tell us about who clients are. I'm sure it's a very broad mix of customers, but can you give me a general sense of how big are they, what industries they're in, where they're located?
Sure. So our clients are actually located all around the world because we have a very strong international group. So within that group and within the intellectual property group and our immigration group, we have companies that are located outside the US that want to establish themselves inside the US. we also have companies that are US based. They are in every industry that you can think of. We represent generic pharmaceutical manufacturers. We represent pet products companies. We represent publishing companies. We represent entrepreneurs who are starting their own businesses. We represent creative agencies. Basically, you name it, we represent. I think I can find a client in almost every consumer products industry. We represent real estate and construction, so owners and developers. So, and everyone, the key here is that everyone is bringing in information. The information that we're talking about with regard to privacy and cyber is personally identifiable information, PII. And many jurisdictions call it PII. Some jurisdictions will shorten it and call it personal information, private information. In Europe, it's called personal data. But it's information that is designed to assess who is this particular person. So you start off with the name of the person or a nickname, and then you delve deeper. What do I mean by that? Name, address, phone number, email address, social security number, driver's license information, household information, IP address, anything that a hacker or scammer can use to make their lives better because they're stealing your identity.
And when it comes to personal information, this is always a big question mark in the minds of a lot of my customers. They're like, well, I don't collect any personal information. I'm like, well, do you collect a name and address? Because you can't have a customer file, even if you have just a very basic system, without those two pieces of information. Does a name, a client name and a customer address quantify or qualify as personal information or personal identifiable information under the law in the US?
Well, there's no one law in the US.
Okay, that's right.
Makes our lives much more complicated. There are 50 state laws.
Okay.
And then
Generally
there's federal,
speaking, though,
right? And there's
generally
federal
speaking,
laws.
under this 50 state umbrella, is name and address a PII?
It could be.
Okay.
It could be. I have to quantify that because of the plethora of laws under which, you know, we run. If you're talking about educational records, think about it. Name and address of a student.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it really depends on why you're collecting it and under what law that collection may fall. So you've got federal laws with regard to financial information and education information, certainly. Health information, certainly. Those are covered by federal law. But other information about your suppliers or vendors, you've got name, you've got address, you've got email address. You may have IP address, which is the address assigned to your computer. So all of those together, you have credit card information. So all of those together will qualify you under many statutes as personal information.
And the reason that we kind of talk about this and make this a big deal kind of to start the conversation is to fast forward, because if a breach, a hack, or an event takes place, personal information is really the hinge on which this door swings. It's why notification is going to be required or may be required. A lot of things get triggered from the kind of information you collect and how much you collect and how sensitive that information is, right?
Yes, absolutely. So you start off with this, we'll call it personal information, but then you drill down deeper and you find out, okay, what is actually sensitive information?
Right.
So what we do is we start off with a fairly substantive Excel spreadsheet asking all of these questions.
Okay.
Who, what, where, when, why. So what are you collecting? Into which category does it fall? Is it a vendor? Is it a customer? Is it another kind of supplier? Is it a third party?
Is it an employee?
Employee.
Right.
What, from whom are you collecting it? What are you collecting? And then where are you storing it? So is it only on a server in physical premises? Is it in the cloud? If it's in the cloud, what are the terms of that cloud agreement? What happens if the cloud server is hacked? So it gets really weedy. And the other thing is, once we finish this questionnaire, we use that for a number of purposes. One is to create the physical written policies that many of these state laws and these federal laws, and then international laws, if you're collecting information from people outside the United States, require. So there's a whole host of written agreements that you have to have that are governing the very questions that we asked. So, okay, people, we've got all this information. What are we supposed to do with it? And how do we secure it? And these, I'm not talking about external policies. I'm talking about internal policies that every employee should be familiar with, should be reading, should be signing an acknowledgement that they understand it, because employees are, and any personnel are, where the hacks or the malware can start.
They're the gatekeepers.
They are the gatekeepers, exactly. Right. And then the other important thing is mapping.
Right.
Because as you mentioned, breaches. Well, many of these statutes say you've got to respond in a reasonable period of time. What is reasonable? And then they will have, some of them will have 72-hour. You have to respond and report and notify perhaps a state agency in 72 hours. If your data, if your personal information isn't mapped properly, well, that's going to be a really hard 72 hours. And what do I mean by mapping? 50 state laws. If there's a hack, you have to have your policies in place to know, well, who do I notify in Indiana? Who do I notify in California? Who do I notify in New York? And you're notifying not only those agencies, but perhaps the individuals themselves. If you have to sort through everything to segment it and map it in that 72 hours, and you have to prepare all of your breach notification letters then, that's a really, really big task.
Yeah. Now, I can just imagine that people who are watching or listening to this, their eyes are already glazed over and they're like, oh, this really only applies to companies that are much bigger than me. So why don't you answer that question?
No, it doesn't. In New York, we have SHIELD, which is a Data Security Act. We don't actually have a Privacy Act in New York. It's in one of the committees in the Senate. But the Data Security Act, which is called SHIELD, does have requirements for small businesses. And you also have to follow these rules. Now, you don't have to, maybe do quite, not say quite as much, but you still have to follow the rules. So the reasonableness standard would be slightly less than a multinational company.
Right.
So
right.
It's reasonable in context.
Right.
That's what the rule says with regard to small entities, but small entities still have to follow these policies and procedures.
So the second, I'm going to play the devil's advocate.
Please.
The first thing is, well, these rules don't apply to me. I'm too small. So we've kind of dispelled that just about every business, regardless of size, has some level of responsibility to maintain safe data practices and have a policies and procedures to address those facts. Okay.
In New York, you said every business. In New York, the statute is written that says any person or entity that possesses the personal information, private information of New Yorkers is subject to this law.
So a wealthy family that might have servants, nannies, caretakers, they're aggregating data on people that could be, okay, so that broadens my view of this. But the second thing I was going to say that I can hear echoing in my mind from so many conversations with clients and prospects about cybersecurity is, well, it's never going to happen to me. And I'll partially answer it, then I'll toss it back over to you. I can see you're anxious to answer it. We do know it happens. I've spoken to plenty of clients and prospects who have experienced some form of a breach, attack, ransomware hack, whatever it may be. And we'll kind of digest this in a few minutes around having the right policies and procedures in place makes that experience a lot easier to deal with. Thinking it's not going to happen to you is nothing short of putting your head in the sand, because it's really not a matter of if it's going to happen to every company in America and across the globe. It's just when. It's when is your time is up, and how prepared are you going to be when this event occurs? So maybe we've kind of set the stage now. What do you want to comment? How do you want to comment on that?
So absolutely. Everyone who has this personal information is a target, because the personal information is so valuable to hackers, because they can create false identities and open up credit cards and, perhaps access bank accounts. Everything that you hear can happen, and no target is too small. So the first step is, okay, answer the questionnaire, figure out what information you're collecting. Second step, how are you securing it? Are you just relying on your internal IT or your managed service provider? Or do you have a cybersecurity specialist? And I work with a number of different cybersecurity specialists, and they work with my small clients and my big clients, and they are building the moat. So the whole point here is you have this moat. You have someone who is watching all the time to see if there are intrusions. And that's really important. You are lessening the risk of being hacked if you have that moat.
So let's talk.
Yes, please.
Let's just stop and just talk about that moat for a second, because I think for a lot of business owners, large and small, they question, well, I've got a firewall, or I've got antivirus, or I've got this, or I've got that, I've got endpoint detection. I think what we're talking about is a much broader subject, because you use the term they're watching. These outside professionals are watching. They're keeping an eye on that moat. So why don't you delve into that? I think we're talking more about penetration testing, endpoint detection and response, all that sort of stuff. I don't want to get too technical, because then everybody's eyes glaze over. But at a high level, what are we talking about here, and what is a practical approach to this moat?
So what you just mentioned, first of all, first line of defense. Let's talk about antivirus. Do you have antivirus installed on every single device? On all of the devices at work, all of the devices at home. So I'm talking about anything that's connected to the internet: laptop, phone, iPad, tablet. People are BYODing, bringing your own device, using your own device. Was antivirus software installed? When I ask that question, I often get, the response, oops.
I think so.
Right? So that's the first question. Install the antivirus software on everything, update it. So that's really number one. Encryption. Use encryption for all transfers of information. What platform are you on? Are you using a Citrix-based platform? Do you have a VPN? How is your security set up? Do that analysis. Find out the weaknesses. Plug those holes. So those are the basics. Then you start off with, we call them white hats. They're actually trying to get into your system. You hire them. They're trying to get into your system, and therefore they reveal the vulnerabilities so that they can fix them. And this is a continuous process. One thing that you'll look for is, are you running old software that nobody is using anymore. That's how Colonial was hacked. They were running old software nobody was using anymore, protected by a really long password. No multi-factor authentication. No one looked to see if the software was running or not. So that's another thing that I advise. Do an assessment of all the software you're running and clean it up. Multi-factor authentication. How are you getting into, if you're working remotely, how are you getting into your office system? Do you have to insert a password? And if so, at what stage? So for us, we can't get in unless a password is sent to our phone. We put that password, which is a one-time 10-minute only password, into the system. That brings us to another screen where we enter another password, to a third screen, which is our office screen, where we enter yet a third password. So triple authentication. Even if you're using a VPN, you still have to enter passwords. So, what really drilling down deep and have your employees understand why, so that they don't employ workarounds. Why? Because we want to prevent somebody from getting in. And by having these 10-minute only passwords, very difficult for someone else to get into your system. Right. And also putting the antivirus on the phone, because you don't want someone in the phone looking at that password, which would enable them to get in. And that's, those are the basics. Then a cybersecurity expert will go deeper. We'll do penetration testing, which is this looking in and trying to find the vulnerabilities. But we'll also do training. Train employees to recognize an email. Apple is not reaching out to you. Amazon is not reaching out to you by phone, by text, saying that you've won something. So just training on, what is, don't click on a link, but that sort of training is really important, because that's the way, if you click on any of these suspicious links, malware can go into your system and start taking in everything. So the training is also really, really important, so that people understand the why.
Right.
They're reading lots of pages of policies, but if you don't explain the why, then everything's just not going to be absorbed. If you do explain the why, then people will understand it, and they're much more likely to employ these preventative measures that you're asking them to do.
Right. We've had prior conversations on the show about training, and my general impression is that a lot of employers who may be new to this conversation around cybersecurity think training is incumbent on them, that they have to create the training and reinforce it. And it's not necessarily true. You can buy products off the shelf. You can have your managed service provider provide training. There's a variety of ways to do it. But I guess the point I want to make is that it's not as burdensome as you may think it is. It's relatively easy today. So do you have any comments on that?
Absolutely. There are a lot of vendors that provide very straightforward training on cybersecurity. So, it can be a half hour, it can be an hour, and your employees can access that training wherever they are. And it's mindfulness, being mindful of these issues and, going through the scenarios. So,
and sometimes these training
it's really
companies,
not.
yeah, it's not that difficult. And I was going to say, many of these training companies will also give you testing. So they'll spoof emails to everybody on your email list to see who clicks on the link, which is a clear indication that maybe these employees need some additional training and reinforcement.
Yes.
That's being done on very large corporate platforms as well as small business platforms. And what I've seen is that it's very helpful to get a clear picture from a high level what your environment is doing on a daily basis.
Yes, and in the remote environment, having the ability just to log on to that training platform and get the training and sign the certificate, and then understand that I should be looking when people send me emails. If this looks weird, it probably is weird and I shouldn't do anything about it, or I should forward it, not click, forward to IT to take a look at.
Right.
So yeah, so we do that. We recommend it to our clients, definitely, because that's the way you educate and that's the way you build that moat around your system, especially with regard to people who are sending out wire transfers, sending out checks. You have two people covering each other, because these scams are very sophisticated. So if they already know who some of your customers or suppliers are, because you're friends on LinkedIn with them. LinkedIn is a public platform. You can mine LinkedIn for a ton of information about, company A uses supplier B. So then a hacker will mimic supplier B and say, hey, you remember you owe me this invoice. So everything has to be triple checked, because once that wire transfer is out,
it's gone. Yeah.
Yes.
We had one client that did have a wire transfer problem, and he released about an $83,000 payment to a vendor overseas, and then got a call from who we thought was the vendor. Hey, you haven't paid me yet. And he's like, I paid it 3 days ago. And he's like, it hasn't hit our bank account. He goes, no, I put it in your new bank. He goes, we don't have a new bank. And this is a very common scheme. He was fortunate, really fortunate that, and I'm trying to think of where it was going, what country. Let's just, for argument's sake, it was Malaysia. And Malaysia's federal government said any inbound wire transfers need a 5-day waiting period before they clear the banks. It was just implemented, and this guy's wire was still pending, so he was able to withdraw it. But that doesn't happen that often.
No, it doesn't. So that type of preparation is critical, absolutely critical. I mean, if you receive, as you just said, our bank has changed, call your contact.
Yeah, red flag.
Don't bother with email, because their email could have been compromised. I always suggest a phone call. Always.
Yeah. And I think this conversation, if we had it 12 months ago or 18 months ago, would have been a lot different than it is today, because the environment is rapidly changing around us. The level of sophistication that hackers are deploying is much different today, like I said, than a year and a half ago. And what we're seeing on the insurance side of it is that cyber underwriters are becoming much more sophisticated as well, and asking much more complex questions, and really not giving away the store in terms of coverage options if those questions aren't being answered accurately. If you do not have a secondary means of, or triple means of verifying a wire, you're not going to get wire transfer coverage in your cyber policy on your next renewal. If you can't answer these questions, you're going to have business interruption insurance removed from your cyber policy. So not just from a critical kind of business operational standpoint that you cover, Amy, but from my standpoint, this now gets into the insurance. And if you're not prepared, you're going to have depletion of coverage, and then you're going to have a real problem when a claim occurs.
Exactly. And I tell that to my clients all the time. I say, okay, let's look at this cyber insurance questionnaire together to make sure that you're in compliance. And the more you do, the possibility is you're going to pay less premium. So it's a win-win situation. You're building that moat, you're paying less premium, you are protected. So, it's the case of, are you opening up your barn so that all of your data can flow out? Or are you closing that barn and building a moat around it and securing your data so that you can demonstrate, well, we've done everything technologically possible and reasonable in our circumstance for our size business to protect ourselves and protect our clients' information. The other thing we haven't touched on is companies sign agreements all the time. what's in those agreements? What do those agreements say about data security? Especially if that company is sending you private information, personally identifiable information. You've got obligations to protect it. You've got obligations to segment it. So, you've got those obligations as well, and you need to understand them and know about them. And because you do not want to be in breach of that agreement. You definitely do not want to be in a situation where you've been hacked and somebody else's information that you're holding has been taken. I mean, from a reputational standpoint, that's just, has a very negative effect.
Yeah, it could be incredibly damaging.
Yeah, and how do you get back up and running? If you're not organized, what is the harm to your business if you're out for 2 weeks?
Let's stop there for a second, because I want to take a step back on contractual obligations, because we see with clients who may be in the data tech business being forced to sign agreements and have cyber insurance with fairly high limits, which today is becoming difficult to get, be frank about that. But what a lot of business owners in the non-tech world aren't really seeing or thinking about are downstream risks, where they may be transferring data to third parties, but not holding those third parties responsible. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Have you had experiences there and how you're guiding customers around that subject?
Yes. So what is best from my risk-averse perspective is that any company to whom you are transferring personal information, they must have a robust policy protecting that information, robust security protocols, the proper amount of insurance, and naming our client as an additional insured on the policy with a tail after the agreement has expired.
Okay.
Because, and yes, you're requiring them to delete the information, but who knows if it's actually been deleted, even if you get a certificate saying, yes, it's been deleted. So you want a tail for at least a few years after that to make sure that if there was a hack later on, even after the relationship is over, that you've got that coverage. And we may also ask for a waiver of subrogation. So yes, we are advising our clients to do that. And then we haven't even gone into transfer of information from Europe to the US, which, could be a 2-hour talk.
Let's just, do you have an example of what a general business may be transferring data to third parties for them to process or store or work on? I'm trying to think of an example.
An actual example. Yes, absolutely. So let's say that you're a company that has a platform, an online platform like Peloton, where Peloton is collecting all of this personal information, including possibly health information, from all of its clients. It's transferring that information, possibly, if this is something that Peloton might want to do, to individual personal trainers. And those individual personal trainers are going to process that information. Now, Peloton is not doing this now because it's just offering, you log on, you see a trainer, you work. But let's say they decided to go into a business where you have a one-on-one relationship with a personal trainer. In that case, there would be a transfer of quite a lot of personal information to that personal trainer or personal training company. How is that personal training company securing the personal information? That's a situation in which there would be that sort of transfer.
Exchange of information that needs to be secured by, a belt and suspenders approach.
Yes.
I'm thinking of a situation, any company that's going through a merger or acquisition.
Of course.
A tremendous amount of data goes into a data room and it's shared. Okay, who's it getting shared with? What happens with that data, like you said, after the analysts, the consultants, the accountants, the attorneys, all the deal makers? What happens with all that data? Does it get destroyed? Does it get downloaded? Does it have to stay in the data room? These are questions that I'm not sure really get asked very often, because we treat data as if it was still, in paper form, and then, oh, they're going to shred it.
Exactly.
Not necessarily.
And you mentioned data room. So, and I said earlier, look at the terms and conditions. If you are holding information in the cloud, does that cloud provider have the right to look at your information? There are several where the answer to that question, surprisingly, is not no. The answer to that question is yes. So what does that do to the promises, the reps and warranties that you've made saying, yes, of course I'm keeping this confidential.
Right.
Of course it's only limited to a certain number of personnel on a least privilege approach. Well, not if the cloud service provider can look at it. So really important to get into the weeds and look at those provisions.
And then to take a step further, that reps and warranties is backed by an indemnity agreement. If you violate the indemnity, then you're going to have your escrow withheld, and it's going to be just, excuse my French, a shit show, and you're not going to be happy.
Exactly. So, and it's always important, and I mention this a lot, slow down, take the time to actually think about these questions and give considered answers. This is not an area where you want to rush.
Right.
It's not an area where you can call your counsel and say, uh-oh, I got this questionnaire because, we're a creative services agency and we're going to be working on a project, and the project is going to involve, some of this personal information or even sensitive information. It takes time to figure out what is the right approach and right strategy. So it can't be rushed.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me into the next thought process, and that is it is a bit of still new world experience for a lot of decision makers, because these sorts of risks just have not crossed their mind. They have not experienced it. And from my kind of vantage point, if somebody's not had an event, they've all experienced a general liability claim or a property claim or an auto claim. If they've not experienced a cyber claim, there is this certain kind of bulletproof thought process. Well, it's not going to happen to me. It's never happened in the past. Why am I going to have a problem in the future? Well, because the future has changed from what the past was. I don't want to get too deep into that. But I guess the question is how does a decision maker get advice? Where do they get counsel? When do they need to realize I better call Amy and kind of just run through this, because I've never experienced this sort of contractual obligation before?
So I do a lot of speaking in a variety of different venues to get the word out so that people understand there are resources that they can use. They can call me, they can call someone else in my field. I have connections with cybersecurity professionals whom I trust, and so they don't have to look for that resource. They come to me, I will be able to give them at least 3 external resources that can help with all of the tech issues that we've discussed. Mm-hmm. So I do speaking for a number of business groups, including Vistage, USA 500, and bar associations. So New York Women's Bar Association, the New York State Bar Association. Actually, I was speaking at the Elder Law Committee meeting back in October, at some other meetings in the last few weeks upcoming, and for Vistage. I haven't mentioned Vistage before. So education and being able to provide real world practical answers. So that's really one of my goals, because you can do this. Mm-hmm. It's not as daunting as it may sound. You can do it.
So it's a brave new world. So awareness
Yes.
is a big piece of it. I still believe that there's a lot of, sizable businesses that just don't have that level of awareness of what this risk is and how it can destroy value, and really disrupt a business from, an operational level to a mindset level to missing goals and forecasts. This is a serious threat, but it can be dealt with. So awareness, training, education, implementation, I think all these things. And then, of course, my world, which is the protection piece of it and the funding mechanism to, help pay for things when things go wrong. And that's a big piece of it.
Yes, that's a huge piece of it. I was having a conversation with some other experts in the field, and companies buy cyber insurance, but they don't realize that the first call, if they suspect a hack, must be to their carrier, because their carrier has all of the resources that the company will need to do an investigation, to help with response, to help get you back and running. So that's got to be the first call. And you can affect your coverage, correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't notify quickly. Swiftly.
Yeah, cyber, like so many other policies, has notification procedures and policies within the policy itself. And that late notice in many policies, cyber included, is going to cause you problems. I think that the worst thing a business owner can do is think they have an event and say, well, I'm not sure we have an event, or let's not let this get out. And we've had situations where we've observed, not our clients, but in the news, businesses that have actually been approached by outside third parties that watch the dark web for activity, identify, we think this leak is coming from your firm. And they're like, no, it couldn't be. And they just ignore it. And then the next thing you know, the FCC or the state attorney general or whoever regulatory authority is knocking on their door and saying, I think we've got to do an inspection here. We have to uncover what we've got. But going a little off track, I think what your point is that notification early is in your best interest. If it turns out to be nothing, no harm, no foul. Your insurance company is there to kind of make sure that your bases are covered. And if they find out that you're really not infected or that you haven't had a breach, fine. You're not going to suffer, a rate increase just because you called your insurance company.
And I think that's really important to emphasize, because that's a question that I get asked quite often. Oh no, I don't want to call them because they'll raise my rates.
Right.
But that's absolutely backwards, especially in this field. Because if there has been a penetration, you want them on your side as soon as possible to help ameliorate that penetration.
Right.
And activate the coverage.
And I've said it before on this program and others that, we do things so digitally today that I'll send your cyber policy to you digitally. Inside that cyber policy will be the 1-800 hotline, which is access to your breach coach who is going to help you uncover and unpack the event. Print off that page.
Yes.
Put that in good old-fashioned paper somewhere in a filing cabinet, or have it somewhere outside of your digital environment that if you get a ransomware attack or lockdown somehow, that number isn't lost. Look, you can call me, you can call your agent, you can call your broker. But if it's Saturday at 10 o'clock at night, you may not have my cell phone number, or the point is that if you have the number to the breach coach, that 1-800 my hair is on fire number, that's who you want to call first and get them on the phone right away.
Yes, and in part, when I prepare incident response plans with a client, everyone's number is in that incident response plan.
That's great.
That gets printed, because if your system is knocked out, you can't find it. So that document gets printed, and every person has a copy of that document. So if something happens and everyone is locked out, you're not calling the person who usually has control of all of the documents because nobody can access them. So that's a situation where, yes, we're using trees, we're printing out the documents, and everybody has a copy. If your phone's locked, if any other devices are locked, well, where do people keep important phone numbers? On their phone. But if the phone is locked, you're not going to find those numbers.
Right.
So that is the purpose of the incident response plan. Have everything in one place, printed, keep updating it every couple of months, and then that's part of your moat.
And we're kind of laughing about it, but it's very serious. And I think that a lot of people, it's such a new thing that we don't think about it. We don't have this conscious awareness of like, oh, we may not be able to get any data. That's pretty serious,
Yes. And I heard of a story just the other day where somebody was down for 2 weeks and they could not do anything at all for 2 weeks.
And that's your typical ransomware event.
Yes.
So, I'm not trying to sell cyber insurance right now, but if you don't have insurance, you're writing a check likely to an organization, not writing a check, you're paying in Bitcoin or some other digital currency, virtual currency, to an organization that has infiltrated your system and locked you out of it so that you can get the keys to unlock it. You're going to probably be down for a week or two trying to figure that out. You're not billing your customers because you can't bill them. You're not working. If you have 20 employees, you've got 20 employees sitting around doing nothing. So there's a tremendous loss, and you're paying them. So you've got a tremendous business interruption claim on top of the ransomware demand that you've paid, on top of, God knows how much it's going to cost to have experts come in and forensically examine your data, make sure you're doing your notifications if you have to, all of that stuff. So these claims, the numbers are all over the ballpark. They can range from $80,000 to $800,000 to $4 million. But I think that an unexpected expense, whether it's 5 figures or 6 figures or 7 or 8 figures, is not a welcomed surprise for any business owner.
No, and do you have that in the bank?
Right.
Because even if you have the insurance, it's going to take a while for that check to be cut.
Yeah.
So, you have to look at the cost benefit ratio of building that moat with the legal policies, with the insurance policies, with the penetration testing and the expert tech versus being completely out of pocket for 2 weeks.
Right.
Weigh that, and where is the risk? Obviously, you and I think the risk is not doing anything.
Yeah. And if we haven't scared the crap out of you yet, and that really is not the intent of this conversation, it's more about awareness. It's really about talking frankly about what the risks are and what we face every day. Again, it doesn't matter if you've got no employees or 2 employees or 200 employees or 2,000 employees. Businesses of all sizes face a very significant risk that can be impactful of their earnings, their cash, their reputation, their future earnings. I just go down the list. And to be respectful of everybody's time, what kind of wrapper would you want to put around this, Amy?
Well, I hope people aren't crawling into a hole. These problems are solvable. So we can help you prepare the required legal policies. We can help you with the tech side by introducing you to trusted resources. We can help you with the insurance side by working with Gordon. So these problems are solvable. And honestly, everyone will sleep better at night knowing that they've done everything possible to build that moat. I personally would not be able to sleep without the moat.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great way to kind of wrap it up, that we have presented some huge, scary nightmare scenarios. Every business faces these threats to some degree or another. It may not be tomorrow, but it certainly is better to be prepared. And it just starts with a conversation. Call Amy, call me, call your other trusted advisors. What do you think the next step is? What do I need to do? I will say that if you're not spending budget on cybersecurity today, you're going to need to. And there is expense associated with it, but not doing that is more hazardous and more costly down the road. Much more
costly.
So
absolutely.
Amy, great conversation. If anybody wanted to get in touch with you to talk about this, what's the best way? How's the best way to do that? So
email is best.
Okay.
And my email address is agoldsmith, so AGOLDSMITH @tarterkrinsky.com. And that's TARTERKRINSKY.com.
And I'll put that in the show notes on the podcast, as well as in the description on YouTube. And if they want to reach out and link on LinkedIn and connect with you, are you active there? Yeah.
Yes, I am not as active as I should be, but yes, I am active on LinkedIn, and I enjoy posting on LinkedIn when I get a chance. So, and I've actually made some really nice connections with people on LinkedIn. So I find it to be a very valuable resource.
That's great. So Amy, thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate your time, your expertise, and your input. I know we only scratched the surface. Folks, before we get on a conversation, I normally will kind of speak to a guest about the types of things. And Amy sent me a document that's a couple pages long with 1 million bullet points and all valuable things. It would have taken a long time to go through all of those things, but I think you get the gist of Amy's capabilities and expertise in the area of cybersecurity. So I just think reach out, start a conversation, and let's chat about these things. So it's been great conversation. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
It's been great. So folks, my name is Gordon Coyle. If you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on the New York Business Leaders Podcast, reach out and drop me a line. I'll put my email address in the show notes as well. And until next time, thanks for watching and listening. Take care.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.